Right. Welcome to Arts and Healthcare Week. I'm Alexis Shockley. I'm the art specialist, and today we're going to be doing a little project using watercolor and pastels or crayons if you have those. And we're going to do a really nice painting. This is a project I've done a lot with patients throughout the hospital, so it's something that you can see is what I do with patients. This project's really neat because it spans from all different ages. So I've done it with little children and I've also done it with adults. The results vary, but the whole process is enjoyable no matter what. All right, so let me show you what we'll be doing. This is an in progress one that I have done. I'll also show the patients while they're working, the steps, and I'll often do the painting with them. So this is the almost finished product of what you'll be doing. All right. So you're probably wondering what the markers are for. What's really interesting about working with markers is if you don't have watercolor paint, you can use markers instead of paint. So I'm going to show you that. All right, so you can color on any kind of plastic surface like this. And dip your paintbrush in some water. Move it around. And you have watercolor paint. So that's an option if you don't have paint, but you got lots of markers laying around. This is also a fun way to utilize markers that have dried out a little bit. You can dip them in water and do the same thing. So just a fun little tip. All right, and this also works for those that are tuning in that may not have paint. You can use markers. All right, step one is we are going to draw our water lilies. So you can see here the water lilies are a U shape with just a zigzag on top. So we're just gonna, wherever you want them, normally I would probably put most of them mid-range and down, not up too high up. So I'm just gonna draw some U's. You can do some big, some small. Get some paint on my paper there. As many or as little, and you can even overlap some like that. Make sure you're pressing nice and hard, especially if you're using crayons. They're not going to be as waxy as oil pastels. These have a little bit more of a soft feel to them where you can kind of get a thicker and darker color as opposed to crayons. So if you're using crayons, just press a little harder and kind of go over the lines a little bit. All right, after you've done that, go in and just do some zigzags on top. Once you've closed off your U's and done the zigzags, you're going to color them in. We're going to learn a few techniques. This one's called wax resist. So the wax, I'm sure you all learned in school back in the day that oil and water don't mix. So there's wax, oil pastels. When you run water over them, it's not going to stick. Depending on how many flowers you did, you could be done or you still have half of them to color in. No rush. Now I've chosen pink and orange for the insides of my flowers, but you can use whatever color. You can see they have just these kind of spiky little zigzag lines inside of the flowers. It's going to kind of create a more three-dimensional look. So instead of drawing them right on top of the zigzags, we're going to go down a little bit into the flower. Just a little scribble. All right, now we have just a bunch of yellow floating flowers. So to make them kind of look like they are attached to something, they're not just floating in the sky, we're gonna do the lily pads. Lily pads, I've worked with patients that have really good artistic ability, so they get a little fancy with their lily pads. But for more basic, I'm just gonna do kind of like a little swirl. So think of a teacup sitting on a saucer, just kind of that little ear shape, kind of like a C. And you want to go behind the flower a little bit. That makes it look like it's sitting on something. You can do big ones. All drawing is shapes and lines, if you think about it. So if you can look at an object and you want to know how to draw it, just try to break it down into shapes. So, you know, these flowers were just used and they had just a zigzag line, and the lily pads are almost full ovals. Okay. If you have another shade of green, if not, no problem. You kind of just do like a little swirl inside. You could also just do another one of those ovals, or I like to do like a little swirl in there. Make sure you're still pressing nice and hard, that the color stands out a lot. And then you can do some lily pads just kind of on their own, floating around in the water. You don't want to do big circles because they're not going to look like they're floating on water. Just make sure you're doing kind of like flat ovals, discs. Now, if you have a white, everyone should have a white. I want you to do some ripples in the water. You're not going to see too well what you're doing. I don't know if you can see that ripple I just did right there. Press nice and hard and do some wavy lines in your water all over, short, long. The more ripples you do, the more rough your water is going to look. You could even do some little puddle marks around. You can kind of see the reflection. Sometimes you might need to lean your paper to the side and you'll be able to see where you drew with the white. Right. If you're still drawing, no problem. This next step is going to take a while, so you can join in anytime. Now we're going to paint the water. So you don't need your crayons, your oil pastels any longer. We're going to just use watercolor. So watercolor, I always say that watercolor is sleeping until we add water. So water wakes up the watercolor. The more water you use, the lighter the color is going to be. The less water, the richer and darker the color is going to be. And we want to go a little bit lighter because the water, we want it to be light and have some movement to it. We can use a little bit more of the darker watercolor with less water if we want to do some shadows, kind of like right here. So you see how I did some shadows under the water, under the lily pads. I kind of used a little bit less water, but out here I used more diluted watercolor. All right, so let's get some water on our brush. And let's find our blue. The blue and the purple kind of look alike till you can use purple in the water too. All right. So get your brush nice and wet. Get a little bit of watercolor. I just got a little bit on there, not too much. Just gonna start painting the water. Don't go on your lily pads because our lily pads are gonna be green, but you'll see what happened. A little bit of a, let me give a shadow there. You can see better the white where we drew with the white crayon, how the ripples are starting to show in the water. Such a fun technique. People are really surprised that that happens. Lots of water. I mean, I'm not even putting any paint on my brush right now. I'm moving around the paint that's already on the paper. So I haven't dipped my brush in a while. There's a lot of paint on my paper I can move around. If you have paint on here and you want to try to move it around, just dip your brush in the water. That's what's really relaxing about watercolors. It's just, all it is water. Move it around. It's easy to work with for the most part. I'm gonna do some darker blue like that underneath some of my lily pads to give the illusion of them sitting on the water like a shadow. It's kind of nice if you do the shadows under the lily pads, you can actually just use that paint with water. So I'm going to rinse all the paint off. All I have is water on my brush, and now I can come underneath all the shadows and move that paint around. When I work with patients, I love watching them do the projects. Often they just want me to sit with them while they paint or while they draw, or they want me to do it with them. But I could sit and watch folks paint with watercolor all day. So I'm just using water now. I'm not even dipping my brush in the paint. You do like little short brush strokes, it'll look like ripples in the water, but if you did a lot of the white crayon pastel, you'll have enough ripples. Now, if you want it to be like some mucky pond water, you can go in with a little green, because we're going to need the green. So we're going to need the green for our lily pad. So I'm going to go ahead and stop on my water maybe I'll just finish it real quick. College professors always said to paint with your whole arm, not just your wrist. Loosens you up a lot. So don't sit there all tight and wound up. Use your whole arm. It's hard to do when you're doing smaller paintings, but Water is almost done. It doesn't have to be. You can have some unfinished edges. I'm gonna get some green on my brush and I'm gonna paint my lily pads. You don't want it too dark. I did that one a little too dark. You can't see my swirls. Just a little bit. Feedback on this project I always get is everyone is so surprised at how good it looks when they're done. I didn't know I could paint like that or draw. I mean, it's just, like I said before, it's just breaking down shapes. I feel like as we get older, we start overanalyzing what we see. I feel like if I was to ask my 4-year-old daughter what shapes she saw or how she would draw this, she'd probably have an easier time than some adults who may just be overly intimidated and not look too much into what shapes they would see. So that's really it. That is my painting. I'm gonna make you guys turn your camera on a minute so I can see what you did. No camera, Melissa, I have a camera. And take a picture and send it to me so I can see your final paintings. But that is it. Let me turn on this camera. I work too fast.
I'm still working, but that's what I have right now.
Pretty. Yeah, I work really fast. I don't expect everybody to, especially because I've done this project so many times. So that's the final product. It was kind of fun. You get some drips. So this is why it's hard to do this vertical, because watercolor will drip and go down. And always have on hand when you're doing watercolor, paper towels. So if it is dripping, you can kind of control it and stop it from dripping too much. And another fun thing you could add is salt. If you were to put salt on this paper while you had all this color, it would create kind of an almost starburst or firecracker look. You let the salt dry, and when it's all done and dry, you can wipe all the excess salt off. That gives a really cool technique. Sometimes I take the salt packets that come in the silverware wrappings in the cafeteria, the little teeny ones. Those are perfect to take to patients to put on the paper or to use for watercolor. It's the perfect size, the perfect amount to do a little project, because not many people use those in their little silverware wrapping. But thank you for joining me. And like I said, just keep it simple, and you can do a lot with just a few basic things and make something beautiful. So take breaks and do art every now and then. All right. Thanks for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Have a good day.